Good evening and welcome to today's episode of Wanderlust Wednesdays. I'm going to be talking about food. We have a culinary journey along the Rhine. And the Rhine, of course, is one of the rivers that we travel on quite a lot. With our river cruises, there is, off the top of my head, there's about 6 cruises that travel at least part of the Rhine. And what I will do is I will just take you through the main ports that we visit between Amsterdam and Basel, and we'll talk a little bit about food. And I'll also give you an idea of what it's like to eat on the ship. And then it's not just that one Rhine getaway cruise, but it's a lot of different cruises that you could experience, where you can experience at least a part of what there is to drink and to eat along the Rhine. So the Rhine River voyages that we're talking about specifically are the Rhine Getaway, the Grand European Tour, the Paris to the Swiss Alps, Holland and Belgium, the Tulips and Windmills, which do just a tiny little bit of the Rhine, just really the delta, if you will, the Cities of Lights, and the European Sojourn, which is a very long cruise that goes all the way through Europe. And we'll show you a map in the next slide that gives you at least the Rhine Getaway. This is kind of the area that we will focus on when it comes to the particular food and drink. But again, it's more in general about what the experience is like, how we want you to experience a destination, because it's more than just sightseeing. It is eating, drinking, hearing, touching. We really want you to use all your senses when you travel with us. And as we always do, we start with a brief introductory video.
Our Rhine Getaway itinerary presents all the highlights of the legendary Rhine in just 8 days. Your journey begins in timeless Amsterdam. Soak in rich colours amid the stained glass of Cologne's Gothic cathedral. Explore the mighty Ehrenbreitstein fortress that overlooks Koblenz and enjoy an evening stroll along the cobblestones of Rüdesheim. With dawn comes Speyer, a quaint German town on the Rhine's west bank, where you can marvel at the architectural splendour of the city's Romanesque cathedral. Strasbourg, France follows with its timeless old town, while Germany's Black Forest region is rich in history and culture. Your voyage concludes in the pretty city of Basel, Switzerland.
All right, so let's get started with a culinary cruise along the Rhine. And we start in Amsterdam. And on the left-hand side, you see my favorite cafe in all of Amsterdam. That's at Papeneiland. And then on the right-hand side, those are herring. This is not exactly, we wanted to show you the actual fish, but this is not how the Dutch eat their herring. What you do early on in the year in particular, you eat what's sometimes called the new herring. And traditionally, what that meant was that throughout the winter, people would eat herring that was salted. And then in spring, as the ships went out again and the relatively young herring was being caught, then you didn't have to eat the old stuff anymore. And the old stuff was getting very, very salty because that's how fish was preserved. So everyone was super happy when new herring came around. And the way that you eat this is you slice open the fish, you get rid of everything, and you don't have to do this, by the way. The people that sell you the herring will do this for you. You slice open the fish, you get everything out. You do cut off the head, and the one thing that you leave in there is the fish's pancreas, because that will that will start the fermentation process. So the fish that you eat is slightly fermented. You eat it with onions. It is an acquired taste. But I can highly recommend it, and you have to eat it the right way. That's very important. I will show you how you do this. So you have the fish. Imagine you have a little paper tray, because that's how they come. And then you take the fish by the tail, and then you lift it, and you do this. And you eat it. I mean, you don't have to eat the whole thing at once. That's a little gluttonous, but you do eat it as you kind of lower it down into your mouth. Do it once. It's an acquired taste, but you should do it once because it's great fun, and it's something very, very Dutch. And it's something that has to do, you know, the majority of you will travel on the tulips and windmills in spring, and that's also the season of the new herring, and so it's perfect because you will find little stalls all over Holland that sell the new herring. That's one. The other thing, of course, in Holland that you should try is cheese. And I said this actually last week. We ended up talking, Irene and I, a colleague of mine who's also Dutch, we talked a little bit about food, and we ended up talking about cheese. Now, what we do on many of the Rhine cruises is just a little upriver from Amsterdam as we make our way towards Basel in Switzerland. We pass by the windmills of Kinderdijk, and that is an area that is below sea level. It's all grass because very little else will grow there. It's a little soggy. So cows love it. Very nice green lush grass, and cows produce milk, and milk we turn into cheese. So right where the windmills are, you have all these little, and some are somewhat bigger, you have these cheese farms. Just north of the windmills, by the way, is the Dutch city of Gouda. And Gouda, from medieval times on, was a trade center for cheese. It was where you went to get the cheese weighed, and where you got a little mark that told you, okay, this is exactly how much this cheese weighs. So it was a distribution center, much more than a center of a place where cheese was actually produced. This is why most of the cheese that you would get today in Holland is still called Gouda. It has nothing to do with where, you know, a particular procedure of making cheese, because most cheese in Holland is made in a very, very similar fashion. They're always cooked. They're always semi-hard cheeses, and they age, and they end up in these salt baths. You can see that in this image, where, you know, they spend quite a bit of time in this brine to give it extra flavor. And as the cheese ages, it gains in flavor, and that's essentially how the Dutch eat their cheese. So you would go to the market, you would buy a piece of young cheese, and then something, and there's a whole list of gradations in how old your cheese is. It's not just young or old. There's like 4 or 5 different levels of what aged cheese is. If you really like it salty and with a lot of flavor, you eat the really old cheese that crumbles. And if you just like it very creamy, you start with young cheese. One way or another, we take you to a farm that makes authentic cheese the way that they produce what any Dutch person would eat. If you go to Amsterdam, you have great cheese stores there where you can buy all manners of cheese. If you forget about your cheese at the end of your trip, let's say you book Basel to Amsterdam, and the only place where you can get cheese is Schiphol, you're a little late, because now what you're going to get is cheese that is really just made for the tourism trade. And it comes in small balls, and no Dutch person would ever buy that, because the Dutch are very frugal. And what you buy with a small ball of cheese is a lot of rind and relatively little cheese. And the rind of a Dutch cheese you cannot eat. It's hard, it's usually coated in paraffin, so it's waste. Essentially, a small little round ball of cheese is an awful lot of waste. Again, no Dutch person would ever buy that. So then that's about the cheese. You can do this. We visit a cheese farm. You can observe the whole process, and of course, buy your cheese there. Next, and this is also, the slide says Amsterdam, but this is actually related more to Gouda than it is to Amsterdam. These waffles that you can get everywhere now, including Trader Joe's, by the way, if you happen to have a Trader Joe's where you live. But the city where these originated is Gouda. They're very simple. They're these crumbly wafers that are kept together with a little bit of caramel, with a very thin layer of caramel, and then they're packaged in packages of 10. What you do when you eat them, because you know that you don't eat them necessarily. You can get them fresh, but most people just buy them in the supermarket or in a bakery. And before you eat them, you put them on your coffee so that they get a little soft. You leave them on there too long, and they'll land in your coffee. That's not good. But it's really good if you leave it there for just a little bit, because the steam from the coffee warms up your wafer a little bit, and it makes it a little softer. That's how you're supposed to eat them. And originally they came from Gouda. I went to high school in Gouda on my bicycle, and there were three big industries. There was the cheese warehousing, there was candle making, and there were the stroopwafels. And you could always tell where the wind was coming from. If it was blowing from the right direction, you would go to school and you'd be in these wafts of caramel wafers. And if it came from the wrong direction, it came from the candle making factories, and those smell something awful. So you could always tell. It's like, oh gosh, the wind is coming from the west today. Not a good ride to school. Wind coming from the east, very nice ride to school. So much about the Dutch food. We're moving on. We're moving upriver, and then we reach Cologne. And Cologne is one of the largest cities in Germany. It's also one of the oldest cities, and it has a lot of traditions that are very much at home just in Cologne. It's a city that has historically had a bishopric, so religion is still very strong. Lots of churches in Cologne. People are Catholic, while the surrounding area is all Protestant, but the city itself is quite Catholic. And it was always a very industrial place. So a lot of the food that people in Cologne really like is actually, if you will, poor people's food. It's simple, it's basic. Quite often it's a little stick to your ribs. And this is a perfect example. What you see here, a kartoffelpuffer, is essentially not that much different from hash browns. It's grated potatoes with a little bit of egg, a little bit of flour. If you want some breadcrumbs to make them nice and crispy. And then what you see here is just one of many ways in which you can eat them. This has a little dollop of applesauce. You can also do a little dollop of fresh cheese, pork. There's a whole host of different ways in which you can eat this. But Apfelpuffer, or Riefkuchen, as the Germans also call it, is one of those dishes that everyone knows. Everyone's mother knows how to make it. Everyone's aunt and everyone's grandmother knows how to make it. So it's very rooted in the local cuisine. You can also get it in restaurants, and there's actually already some highfalutin nouveau cuisine restaurants who come up with like decomposed kartoffelpuffer. Don't do that. It's silly. The next thing in Cologne, of course, is beer. And beer in Cologne, every city in Germany or every region in Germany has its own tradition when it comes to alcoholic beverages. Some regions are beholden to wine. Other regions are just doing beer. In Cologne, it's a little bit of both, but it's more of a beer city. It has a lot of breweries. And it has a very specific type of brewery, something that is called a Brauhaus. And a Brauhaus can only serve the beer that is brewed on the premises. So it doesn't get more local than that. You should really not try to have any other kind of beer than the beer that is served in a particular Brauhaus. And with that comes a whole culture. You always in Cologne get your beer in a relatively small glass. You can see those here in the image. They're almost like long drink glasses. And you think, well, I thought the Germans were famous for drinking lots of beer. And yes, they are. And all that you need to do is have lots of these small little glasses. This is exactly how it works. What will happen is, as the waiter approaches your table, a waiter in Cologne is called a Kürbis. The Kürbis will hand out beers around the table. He usually has one of those high trays that has slots that fit glasses of beer, and he will hand out the beer. He will put a beer. What do you call these things? Can't think of the name right now. Bierdeckel. Essentially a coaster, a beer coaster, and on the beer coaster he will note how many beers this table has had. If the Kürbis comes by with another one of these trays and you have your glass and it's empty, you just get a new one. If you don't want to drink anymore, you have to notify the waiter. If he puts another glass there because you didn't notify the waiter, then it's your problem and you drink. And the way to notify you take one of the coasters and you put the coaster on your glass. That tells the Kürbis that you're done drinking. It comes with certain foods, very traditional foods. We do this with you on the Rhine River cruises. It's one of those great things. It helps to have someone there to explain all of these things to you that I give you a bird's eye perspective, but it's great fun. Not haute cuisine, very, part of it is very stick to your rib foods. It's good, it's comfort food, and it's a great experience. You kind of have to do that when you're in Cologne. When in Cologne, do the beer. And then you start to head further up the river, and this is when you hit wine country. So as you go through the middle Rhine, and this is the section very well known for its castles, you start to see vineyards. The Romans started with these vineyards a very long time ago. The Rhine is kind of the border of the Roman Empire. As you go upriver towards Basel, on the right-hand side was the Roman Empire. On the left-hand side were the barbarians. And now, on both sides of the river, you have vineyards. And it's one of the oldest wine regions in Europe because, like I said, it's 2,000 years ago that the Romans planted the first vines. As you get out of the very narrow confines of the middle Rhine, you end up in Rüdesheim. And Rüdesheim is one of the first wine villages that is in an area called the Rheingau. This is where the landscape opens up a little bit. You have these rolling hills. The vineyards get a little larger. It's not these incredibly steep valleys anymore. And that's where you drink your Rieslings. It's primarily the wines that you drink in the Rheingau are white wines. And one of the things that you can do there is we visit a castle in the evening where you can have a very nice meal with local ingredients and local dishes, and you drink the wine that is produced in the vineyards surrounding the castle. And that's I always think that that's perfect. You get to drink what you've seen along the way. It's one of those beautiful things on a river cruise. So much of it, on especially along the Rhine, but all of the other rivers, the Danube, the Elbe, even. The Main, I'm getting a little carried away, I admit that. The Moselle, of course, in France, you have the same thing. There's nothing nicer than to float by on a river ship and to look up and in the restaurant say, I would like that wine over there. And the restaurant will have that wine. That's kind of how we want to do it because we want you to have a very, very regional experience. Also, if you want, you can go out and get the wine, bring it onto the ship. No, we do not charge a corkage fee. We just want you to enjoy the wine however you want, whether you buy it on board or whether you buy it on shore. We don't really care as long as you do drink a little bit of wine because it's so much part of the experience. Okay, and then as we move further along, this is an excellent picture. This is some of the food that you can have with a leisurely glass of wine. In particular, this is a Flammkuchen. And a Flammkuchen, it literally means it's a flame cake. It's essentially kind of like a pizza. It doesn't have the same ingredients. There's no tomato sauce. Instead, there is this white sauce that has a little bit of cream in it. And then you put some bacon bits or some ham bits, some herbs on it, maybe a little bit of extra cheese. Onions are always very important, and you bake it just kind of like a pizza in a pizza oven very quickly. Very thin layer of dough. It gets crispy, and it's a very popular snack all the way along the Rhine. And the interesting thing is that Flammkuchen is a German word. It's also used on the French side because Strasbourg, which is a little further upriver yet, in Alsace, it's the capital of Alsace. Is a city where they speak Alsatian, which has more words that come from German than words that come from French. So even the cuisine in that part of France is a little on the, I would almost say on the Germanic side. I'm sure that we have a slide, James. This is Strasbourg, and now James, go right on to the next slide because we'll have choucroute. Choucroute is sauerkraut. It's basically cabbage that has been marinating, for weeks or months in a little bit of vinegar and wine. And you serve that with meat, potatoes, lots of different meats. And one of the things that is, again, somewhat of an acquired taste, Europeans, especially in this part of the world, tend to eat quite a bit of organ meat. So you will get your choucroute. The way it's served in France is you will get a good thick piece of pork, which is, just it's not exactly like a pork chop. That's not how it's baked. It's cooked or boiled. And you get sausages with it. And some of these sausages are wonderful. And some of these sausages, again, are something that you want to try once if you're a little adventurous, because one of them, for instance, is black pudding. But it's all good. It's all very much food that you can eat really well in shoulder season. There's nothing better than a choucroute when it's still a little cold outside. If it gets a little warmer, then you have a glass of wine and some Flammkuchen. You don't go with this kind of this hearty food. The tarte flambée is essentially the same thing, is the French word for Flammkuchen. And I don't hear, in the rest of France, they say tarte flambée because it's a French word. In Alsace, they'll say Flammkuchen. And bakkeoven is another. That's an interesting dish. It's a meat and vegetable casserole. You are to serve this in a clay pot. And Alsace has a long tradition of making the most beautifully decorated pottery. There are whole villages that concentrate on that. You can buy this in Strasbourg itself. These big pots, and essentially is really just. You cook this forever. It goes on and on and on. It's the whole process of a bakkeoven takes about 12 hours. It used to be, bakkeoven is the word for bakoven, which means the oven. And it used to be that women would do a lot of the preparation at home in little villages, and then towards the end of the day they would go and visit the local baker, who still had a little bit of heat in his oven, in his baking oven, bakkeoven, and the women would give their casserole to the baker, who would then keep it there for another number of hours, and to make sure that the baker or anyone else would not take what was in the casserole, you would put a loop of bread dough around the casserole. And that's how you would know that, if the seal was broken, you knew that the baker's son had been, sneaking, eating at your casserole. So again, Alsace, you're still eating, a lot of it is stick to your food. It's great in summer, of course, everywhere you eat ice cream, but especially in shoulder season, the food there is perfect. And then fast forward a little bit, then we end up in Switzerland. Here we have a little bit more of Alsace. I should point out that cake, or that it's more of a bread that sits on top. That is a Gugelhopf. And again, doesn't sound very French, does it? It's again, it's kind of a German word. It's a relatively dry cake that has almonds in it. And it's eaten at all kinds of festivities. You get a nice big slice of it, and you have it with a cup of coffee. And what you see at the bottom, that's just another version of the Flammkuchen. And what we do in Strasbourg in particular is you can spend hours just walking on our culinary tours from one delightful thing to another. Of course, Alsace is also part of it's the northern part of the wine region, of the wine road that runs along the foothills of the Vosges Mountains. And the Alsatian wines, again, are primarily white wines. Every little village has its own wine fair. And especially in fall, there's nothing quite. And I can say this because I I live in Basel, and Basel is at the very bottom of this mountain range that runs along the Rhine. So I cross the border, and it takes me about 20 minutes to get onto that wine road. And particularly in fall, it's gorgeous because everything starts to turn colors, and you have these castles on the hills, and every little village has its own wine fair. And a lot of the wine in these regions is consumed, and this is on both sides, by the way. The Black Forest is known for its Black Forest cake. We'll get there in a second, but it's also a region that produces wine, again, predominantly white wine. And in all of these, the reason these wine regions aren't as well known as some of the other, the Bordeaux region or Burgundy, is that historically a lot of that wine has been drank very quickly. And stays local. Alsatian wine right now has made it all over the world, but in particular the wines from the Black Forest region, that still gets drunk mostly within a few years. They're light wines. They're perfect for summer days, and a lot of it never really leaves that part of the world. So this is another thing that you kind of need to keep in the back of your head. You will pick up some wine along the way that you can't get anywhere else because it's not exported. Okay, so now we're in the Black Forest, and I've already mentioned it. The icon of the Black Forest is the Black Forest cake, and there are a handful of things to think about. This is a relatively fanciful version of a Black Forest cake, but there are a handful of things. The cherries are marinated in a little bit of kirsch, and that's important because the cake has it's not drenched in alcohol, but every white layer also has a little bit. Excuse me. Every white layer has alcohol in it, a little bit of kirsch. That's very important. The other thing that's very important is, and this is just, I want to manage your expectations. There's a lot of cream. There's a lot of whipped cream. In Germany, there's no sugar in the cream. The idea is that you taste the cream, not so much the sugar. So if you're not used to that, you're like, something missing. If, however, you just embrace your inner German and you eat it without the sugar, it's perfect. It's really one of those very perfect German cakes. And you can get that anywhere in the Black Forest, and it will not disappoint. And it is precisely because everyone does it the exact same way everyone else has always done it. Forever and ever and ever. It's a very, very traditional cake. And then from the Black Forest, we arrive in Basel, and now we're in Switzerland. Yep, this is Basel, and the Swiss live in a small country with a lot of cows, and those cows make a lot of milk, and the milk is turned into cheese. So much cheese that the Swiss always wonder what to do with the cheese. And one of the things that they know how to do with the cheese is in a fondue. Again, this is shoulder season food. In summer, it's something that you do because it's fun. It's great fun. But it's really, the Swiss themselves eat it really in winter, in fall, and a little bit in spring. It's really simple. The ingredients are wine, usually Emmental and Gruyere. It's usually a mix of 2 or 3 cheeses, and you have a lot of regional versions of it. The version that they have in the French Alps, for instance, it's an Alpine dish. In the French Alps, there you use 3 different French cheeses. The Swiss tend to use Gruyere a lot and tend to use Emmental a lot. And you basically bring the whole thing to a very, very slow, not really rolling boil, just a very, very low boil. Sorry. And then you dip pieces of bread, or you dip potatoes in, and that's what you eat. You basically eat a lot of cheese. The other version of this is a little different. You can also use the potatoes, put them on your plate. And a raclette is a little different. Raclette, every person that participates in a raclette either has his own little pan, or you have a half a wheel of cheese where someone scrapes off molten cheese, and then you get a glob of molten cheese on top of your on top of your potatoes, and that's what you eat. And that doesn't sound very appealing, but I can assure you that it is. It's delicious. It's special raclette cheese, and it is something that you almost have to do when you're in Switzerland. And now, I imagine that not everyone wants to go out and try all these things because you have wonderful, lovely food on the ship. And of course, what we do on the ship is it's really, if you will, there's a handful of things that you need to keep in mind. We serve fresh food, as much as possible locally inspired. We try to take, if you will, the rough edges off of the really acquired tastes. For those, feel free to wander into town and try something that you might just want to do once in your life. We also have things that you're familiar with from home. We assume that most people, 4 or 5 days into their trip may just want something that they're really familiar with. Let's say a piece of salmon or so, or steak, or even, we serve comfort food, if you will. Always available, as we call it. And then we have these events. And you can imagine these events where we do a little bit of, we call it the taste of events, where we may have some waiters dressed up in traditional costumes of the region. And we serve all these kind of little finger foods that are known in a particular part of Europe. We do this in France, we do it in Germany, we do it in Austria, we do it further down the Danube in Eastern Europe, just to give you a flavor. And of course, I think the biggest attraction really eating on the ship is that it feels a little bit like home. Our service is always very friendly. It's always very unassuming. As you know, we don't do white gloves. We don't want to intimidate you. We just really want you to be comfortable and have friendly service. So that's always what the focus is on. So you can have as I mentioned you can bring your own bottles of wine from outside. We have a wine list that is specific to the region that you travel through. And there also we try to strike a balance between what you're familiar with and things where you may want to be a little adventurous. And that, in a nutshell, is the culinary experience off the ship and the culinary experience on the ship. And now, gentlemen, yes, I should mention that. We do have on the sun deck, and this is just, this is not just in case the chef has forgotten to get his sage or his rosemary or thyme. We just always grow it there. We have an herb garden on the ships, and they're not just, they look very pretty, yes. They're not just there to look pretty. We also use what grows there. Okay, and now then, this is a nice picture of the restaurant, but you get the image, you get the picture. James, I think it's time for questions.
Hello, Joost. Yes, plenty of questions for you this evening. Our first question for you comes from Tony, who is in Tennessee, and he's asking us, when is the best time of year to sail on this itinerary?
Depends on what you want to eat. No, there is, especially, there's not a bad time to travel here. There's really not a bad time. And everything is a little different. I love spring in Holland. I would always go to Holland in spring. I just described what the fall is like in Alsace, and it's gorgeous and beautiful, and there's all these little festivals and things like that add an enormous amount of flavor and flair. And then even the last month of the season, Cologne has spectacular Christmas markets. We modify this cruise a little bit, and we have a Christmas market cruise on the Rhine. Strasbourg has great Christmas markets. So there is, it really, and I know that sounds a little like a cliche, but there's not really a bad time to travel along the Rhine. It really just depends a little bit on what you want. If you're easily hot, then don't come in July or August. And if you're easily cold, then don't come in November or in December because it can get cold. It's not that cold. It doesn't get like Minnesota cold, but it can get a little nippy.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question for you comes from Bernard, who's in the US, and he says he remembers a feast called the Rhine on Fire. Does Viking offer a cruise where we can attend this event?
Rhine in Vlammen. It's this. Yes, it's a period of the year. It's not one particular. Each municipality along the middle Rhine has its own Rhine in Vlammen, and so there's a certain season. It's in summer. If you're lucky enough to be there while the ship moves through, great. It's not something that we can easily plan for. But you can always look at you can find this, and you have websites that do it in English, because by now it's become a worldwide phenomenon. All that you really have to do is figure out when exactly Rhine in Vlammen is in a particular locale, and I'm sure that you will be able, with the travel agent or with someone in our call center, to figure out exactly when you need to board the ship, because we have cruises 7 days a week. So it's just a matter of you'll need to do a little bit of puzzling.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question for you comes from Mary, and quite a simple question for us. She's asking your personal opinion on what wine you would suggest that she tries on this cruise.
Well, you try a Riesling and maybe a Gewürztraminer. You try every white wine that you can lay your hands on. Gewürztraminer are kind of heavy. Riesling is a little friendlier, a little fluffy, a little fruity. All these wines. This is the beauty of, I think, of traveling along the Rhine. You get to try some. And for the longest time, this has been not done. For the longest time, people, especially in the US, you would order dry white wines. Along the Rhine, you have some really fruity white wines, and that is a joy. That they're not sweet, they're fruity. There's a marked difference. You should try a number of different things. The Gewürztraminer is a little heavier. Like I said, the Riesling is a happier, lighter wine. And you try some Alsatian wine. You try some wine from the Rheingau. You can even in the northern part, you can probably pick up a bottle from along the Moselle River. So I would just try a whole bunch of different things.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question comes from Mike, who is in the US, and he asks, how large are the breakfasts that we offer on board our voyages?
As large or as small as you would like, because they're buffet breakfasts. And then you can have certain items that are made to order. So you can have breakfast any way you want, really.
I always go for a large breakfast on our river cruises. Our next question for you this evening is from Leon, who is in the US. And he asks, for the river cruises, is a beef steak always available?
Sorry. Yes.
Perfect. And our next question for you comes from John, and he asks, will any of the food in this presentation this evening be made available on board the Rhine Getaway cruises? Yes.
So aside from these food events that we do, we also try to make sure that you have, your normal evening choices or your lunch choices. Sometimes we also serve regional dishes. So yeah, you don't have to get off the ship to try some of these things. This is perfect, great picture, James. This is the Aquavit Terrace. We like you to have a breakfast or a lunch or a dinner outside. There's nothing better than that. Really.
Thank you very much, Joost. And our next question comes from Denise. A nice simple question for us. She asks, is the beer cold?
Yes. The Germans drink their beer cold. No lukewarm beer in Germany. I think it's against the law.
And our next question for you, Joost, this evening comes from David, who is in Orlando in the US. And he asks, where is the best place to find Lebkuchen along the Rhine River?
Scott, you need to work on your German pronunciation. It's
I
Lebkuchen.
thought I would.
Lebkuchen it's gingerbread. And it depends a little bit on the season. In many parts of Europe, gingerbread is a very much a seasonal thing. You have different kinds of gingerbread during different times of the year. Anywhere you can get gingerbread in Holland, you can get gingerbread in Cologne. Cologne is not super well known for its gingerbread, but in Cologne you can get the famous gingerbread from Aachen, Printen. From Aachen. Very unusual because it's rock hard. It's really good, but it's rock hard. And then gingerbread aroma is Alsace. In Alsace, there are whole stores that sell nothing but gingerbread. So there you have it.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question for you comes from Sandra, who is in the US, and she would like to know if there are any non-alcoholic beers available during this itinerary on board the ship.
Yes, there are. Yes. Yep.
And our next question for you comes from Angie, and she asks, when staying in Basel for the cruise extension, do you have any recommendations for a must-try cafe or restaurant?
Depends on what you would like. There are quite a few good restaurants in Basel. If you want something that's very traditional, if you want to try your cheese fondue, there's one place that everyone goes to, and that's the Walliser Kanne. It's a very traditional restaurant. Wallis is a canton that's in the south. It's where they do an awful lot with molten cheese, and the Walliser Kanne is where you can get your cheese fondue 24 or 365 days a year. If you want to go to just a cafe, there's a really nice new cafe now on the Market Square, and that's just great for people watching, and you can't miss it. It's at the it's kind of piggy corner from the red City Hall, and it sits on the short end of the Market Square. Is kind of this long stretched square, and it sits on the short end of the square. And then not far from there is a place called Chocolatel, and that's with an X, and that has hot chocolate from all over the world. You can get like 7 or 8 different kinds of hot chocolate. That is my kids. My son's 17, and he still has not discovered alcoholic beverages, and it's his favorite place to go. Hot chocolate. And then let's see what else. There are a few. There is the Schlüssel, which is very nice, in an old building in town. And the Schlüssel means key, and that's kind of very traditional white tablecloth. That's a very nice place as well. And there's lots of other things. There is, Basel has lots of cuisine from all over the world. The pharmaceutical industry is there, and there are basically chemists from all over the world that live in Basel. So you can get a host of different foods there.
Thank you very much, Joost. We've got plenty of questions coming in asking for your recommendations. I'm going to combine them all into one question. So do you have any recommendations for any cafes or restaurants in Amsterdam or Lucerne? And do you also have any recommendations on any good German red wines?
Okay, so let's start with Amsterdam. The picture showed Het Papeneiland, which is my favorite cafe. What you do in any cafe in the Netherlands is there are a few things that they're really well known for. Most cafes serve some sort of apple cake, and you get that with a very big dollop of whipped cream, and that does have sugar in it. Dutch eat sugar with their whipped cream. You can, let's see, what else? Okay, so one that I really like is in a building called the Beurs van Berlage. just jot it down, and then you'll find it. You can Google it. And that has a cafe in it that is just really nice. It has all the things that you expect in a Dutch cafe, but it's a beautiful place in and by itself. It has some really nice tiling. It goes back to the 1920s. It's one of my favorites. And then there is the Scales building that is in the old part, the Waag, W-A-A-G, and that has a nice cafe in it too. And that has a lot of stories. That is a phenomenal building in and by itself. That is great fun. So those are three in Amsterdam. Then red wine in Germany. Germany is more of a white wine country, but you can get, like in that very southern part of Germany that I spoke about, basically just south of the Black Forest. So between Basel and the Black Forest, you have some red wines, and you would just have to go with the sommelier on the ship. And they would have some local red wines. They're all relatively light. You will not find very many heavy, complex reds in Germany. But you have some wine from Baden, not so much from the other wine regions along the Rhine. You'd have to go a little further towards the east.
Thank you, Joost. And any recommendations for Lucerne as well for that?
No, that's a bit of a difficult one for me. It's one of those places where, it's strange. I can't really help there. I think what I always do in Lucerne is I find a place that overlooks the water. There is one, but I would literally have to Google it. I know exactly where it is, but I can't think of the name right now. And it kind of sits in the bend along the water. In Lucerne, I would always have dinner along the water's edge. That's just, and that's kind of what we end up doing. Scott asked the next question, and I will Google it, and I will see if I can find it. Okay.
Sure, not a problem at all. So we've got a few questions coming in about cheese fondue, so I'm going to combine them all together. The first one comes from Kathy, who's in Eugene in the US, and she asks, what blend of cheese do you use when you're making cheese fondue? And the second half of the question comes from Bobby, who's in the US, and he's asking, will we have cheese fondue on board the ship one evening?
I don't think that we do cheese fondue on the ship, because it's very hard to you can't really have open fire on the ship, and you almost have to have a little flame to keep it going. So it's something where we might have a little bit of a flavor of it, but true cheese fondue is basically you sit there and you spend a few hours sometimes eating more and more cheese. I'm a traditionalist. I would always use Gruyere and Emmental. Whatever you use, you can use all kinds of different combinations of cheese, but one thing you need to remember is you need to respect the cheese. You can't just say, cheese is cheese. If you use random cheeses and you throw them together in a pot and then follow the recipe, that will go terribly wrong, because you need to have cheese that melts really well, and not all cheese melts really well. If you have a piece of Parmesan lying around and you're like, oh, cheese is cheese, we can put that in the pot as well, you're in for a rude awakening. That night, when you decide to put Parmesan cheese in your cheese fondue, don't invite any friends.
I'll be honest, Joost, no one's ever told me to respect the cheese before.
Well,
I will from now on. Our next question for you comes from Bernard, who's in the US, and he asks, will Jaeger Schnitzel form part of the menu on this itinerary on board?
There is some sort of schnitzel very often available, because schnitzels are very traditional, even in Alsace. Basically breaded veal cutlet or even breaded pork cutlet. Jaeger Schnitzel comes with certain accoutrements. That is something that you could just ask the chef. they can probably make that because it's not difficult to do. So if what you really fancy is a Jaeger schnitzel, just ask.
Thank you very much, Joost. Our next question for you comes from Heidi, who's in Seattle. And she says she would like to visit some former work colleagues who live in Cologne and Amsterdam, but she would like to know when she'll be able to know the time of arrival in each port of call, and if that information will be available in advance of her cruise.
Yeah, you can always call our call center, or you can even go through the travel agent. You can find out what the planned arrival and departure is, and we stick to that as much as we can. But running ships along a river it's not a very exact science. You always have to allow for certain things. A lock that is a little congested. It's not as predictable as a train is, but you have in Amsterdam, you depart on the day on the day after you get there on this particular cruise, so you don't really have a lot of time outside of your embarkation day. The great thing is that you arrive early in the morning. Most flights from the US in particular arrive early in the morning in Amsterdam. So you have that full day of embarkation where you can meet your friends. And then in Cologne, you have a full day. And it hardly ever happens that there are such obstructions that you lose an awful lot of time. So in Cologne, you almost always have a complete day. So that gives you a lot of leeway when it comes to when you want to meet your friends. Should not be problematic at all. But to pinpoint it, you might even want to wait until you get to the ship. That day of embarkation is solid in Amsterdam. That's always the same thing. When it comes to Cologne, ask the captain. It's a particular time, and just make sure that you don't want your friends to be waiting there at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then the ship doesn't arrive until 8:45 or so. Then your friends are going to be upset with you right away. It's not a good way to start a reunion.
Thank you very much, Joost. Our next question here comes from Jennifer, who is in Williamsburg in the US. She asks, will the dishes that you've been describing this evening be available during the Rhine River cruise we're taking with Viking in September?
Along the way, certainly in town. And like I said, a lot of these dishes in some way, shape, or form will also be served on the ship. And usually, like I said, on the ship, you will usually find a variant that we have learned. We've been doing this year. We've been doing this for 25 years. So we have learned over the years what works really well for our clientele and what is more of an adventure. And we recommend that if you want to be adventurous, you do it in town. And if you just want to give it a shot, and still make certain allowances for the fact that it might be a little bit too much of an acquired taste, you do it on the ships. But yes, it's like I said, it's very much part of the entire exercise to have you experience the countries through the cuisine. A lot of these things are, so deeply rooted in the culture that, I personally don't think there's any point in going to the Black Forest and not having Black Forest cake. I think it's a wasted opportunity.
Thank you, Joost. Our next question for you comes from Stephen, who's in the United States. And he asks, do you have any recommendations for where to buy chocolate when in Zurich?
Yeah, it all depends on what, if you're looking for a particular brand. So in Switzerland is a relatively small country with an incredible infrastructure. And that means that every brand of chocolate that you can imagine, you can buy it anywhere in Switzerland. So the Lindt is a very large brand of chocolate. That's very popular in Zurich because they have you can do a chocolate tour in Zurich with the Lindt factory. Caillé is very large in Switzerland. In a lot of places they have the very fine chocolate, very expensive, but then things in Switzerland generally are expensive. Lederach is a brand that is, you buy those in these, and they're beautifully wrapped. They make it in the shops, and it looks a little, it looks homemade, if you will. And that's beautiful chocolate. I think if you want to impress your friends back home, bring Lederach, because it's a little on the expensive side, and it also looks the part. Like the people that you bring this for will feel very special.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question for you comes from Pat, who is in Kingsville, which is in Canada, and she would like to know. Well, she would like to go on a tour of the Swiss Alps when leaving the ship in Bâle. Do we have any recommendations for any tours going through the Swiss Alps?
Oh my! Well, we offer you an extension in Lucerne, and those 2 nights in Lucerne give you like a little mini experience in on the Swiss Alps, and then when you end on the Paris to the Swiss Alps, where you end in Zurich. We have an extension that spends 2 nights at the Matterhorn and 2 nights in Geneva, and that takes you on a train through the Swiss Alps. I would always do it. If you're asking me what if I do this on my own, I would say the Matterhorn, of course, is great. What you need to do if you do this on your own, don't start driving, because it's you don't have to. You get yourself a Swiss rail pass for a few days. And then you can take you get a rail pass, and they're good for any vehicle that is part of the Swiss rail system, and then includes the cogwheel trains that go up the mountains. So, for instance, in Zermatt, where you find the Matterhorn, there's a cogwheel train that goes up to a very high meadow where you have a splendid view over the Matterhorn, and that train is included in your Swiss pass. So that's the way to travel in Switzerland. And then, half of Switzerland is in the mountains, so it's relatively easy. The Jungfraujoch is very popular with a lot of people. Interlaken and all of these places are easy to discover by train.
Thank you, Joost. Our next question for you this evening comes from Chuck, who is in the US. He says, we're sailing on the Rhine getaway from Amsterdam to Bâle and considering adding 2 days at the end. He would like your recommendation on whether to book Lucerne or Bâle.
Lucerne. Easy. Yeah. I think Lucerne gives you more of this Swiss mountain flavor. It's more of the postcard that you imagine. By the way, I've kept looking, Scott. I can't find the restaurant. I apologize. The Lucerne restaurant. I will stop now because it looks like I'm distracted, and I am listening, but I was unable to find the restaurant in Lucerne. But Lucerne, if there's a choice between Bâle and and Lucerne, it's Lucerne.
Thank you very much, Joost. Our next question for you comes from Thomas from Norfolk in the UK, and he asks, what types of cheese is the Netherlands famous for?
Well, the Gouda cheese is really what they do. So it's this yellow cheese. It's virtually the same everywhere. There are a few regional variants that you could try if you want to do your Dutch cheese platter, if you will. So it's always hard cheese. It's always cooked cheese. And you would have, there is a cheese from the city of Leiden that comes with cumin. There is a cheese from the north that has cloves in it. And then there's one little soft, it's not that easy to get. There's a soft cheese from the south that is incredibly stinky, but very flavorful, and that's kind of the it's the Limburg cheese. That's not very common, but the Leidse with the cumin seeds, regular Gouda, and then the cheese from the north with the cloves in it. Those are the three. If you want to try the three that Holland is known for, then that's it.
Thank you, Joost. Our
Mhm.
next question this evening comes from Timothy, who's in the US. He says, we're taking this cruise, but going from Bâle to Amsterdam in October. Is the cruise the same length as the cruise starting in Amsterdam to Bâle?
Yeah. Sorry, you travel a little. The travel time on the river is shorter. But what that basically means is that on the way up from Amsterdam to Basel, you do a little bit more night travel. Other than that, the time in port is the same. It doesn't. It matters not.
Thank you very much. Our next question comes from Sue, and she says she'll be on the Rhine Getaway cruise in 2 weeks, but she prefers prefers codfish and haddock. Are there any fish on the Rhine that are similar to codfish or haddock, and are they in season?
No, the Rhine still doesn't have fish that you can that's good for human consumption. It's edible, but in the 1970s, the Rhine was basically, for all practical purposes, you couldn't eat any of the fish. You can now eat it, but it's really not a fish river per se. The Danube is fine. There are other rivers where you can catch a lot of fish. The Rhine's not one of them.
Thank you very much, Joost. Our next question comes from Greg, who's in Munster in the US. He says he will be on the Amsterdam to Omerammergau cruise. His question is, what can we expect in terms of food during the Passion Play?
Okay, you're in Bavaria. You're going to get Bavarian food, which is sausages, meat. It's kind of this stick to your rib Central European cuisine that works a lot with veggies, meat, potatoes. Very straightforward.
Thank you very much, Joost. Our next question comes from Sergit, who is in Vancouver in Canada. He says, we're traveling with Viking in March next year, and we're both vegetarian. Is there a vegetarian menu available on board Viking ships?
Yes. We have vegan dishes now too. The days are long gone, thankfully, where a vegetarian dish was really just, a regular dish without the meat. No, we serve vegetarian food and we serve vegan food.
Thank you very much, Joost. Our next question comes from Mia, who is in Madison in the US. She says she loves cooking, but her question is, do we offer any opportunities to learn cooking techniques or try local cuisine during this itinerary?
Yes. On many of these stations, you have, on many of these ports, you have tours that include food. And usually the idea is that we don't just have you taste things, but also kind of explain to you what it's for, what the traditions are, how to make it. The chefs on the ships are always happy to tell you how they put things together. No, it's absolutely, it's we would like you to come away with a few inspirations of things. In the Black Forest, we even teach you how to make a Black Forest cake. So there you have it.
Thank you very much. Our next question comes from Barb, who is in Canada. Our question is, are reservations required for the Aquavit Terrace?
Nope. First come, first serve.
And our next question is from Walter, who's in the US. And he asks, are there any special culinary comments you have for us when eating at Christmas markets along the Rhine?
Christmas markets and food. No. So, well, what you end up eating is a lot of comfort food because it gets a little nippy. Most people go to the Christmas markets, and the whole idea is that, it's It gets cold, it gets dark early. Let's have some fun. Let's have wine with a little bit of spice in it so that we stay warm. And then let's have some very hearty food. Potatoes, meats, meatballs, cabbages, that kind of stuff. It's all stick to your ribs, hearty food. It's good, and it's sold in relatively small portions so that you don't overeat. It's really kind of nice to pick up little bits and pieces. And of course, this is an ideal time to eat bratwursts. You have to have bratwursts. You do.
Definitely, I agree. Got to have some.
They have vegetarian and vegan bratwursts now too.
Mm.
I kid you not.
And our next question for you, Joost, continues on the Christmas market theme. It's from Joanne, and she's from Richland in the US. But she asks, when will the Christmas market shore excursions be available to book on My Viking Journey?
That's really a matter of as soon as we have them all squared away, and that could be a little later this year. We're still, with our partners ashore, we're still coming out of COVID a little bit, in that everyone is, after 2 years of doing virtually nothing, everyone is still a little rusty getting going again. And so we're a little later than we would normally be, but that's very soon. That's right around the corner.
Thank you very much, Joost. Plenty of questions coming in about clothing and weather, so I'll try and pop them all into one. First of all, do you have any suggestions for clothing when going on the Rhine Getaway cruise? And I've got a question here from Denise from the US, and she asks, what is the best time of year to go for the least chance of it raining? Difficult question to answer, I think, that one.
July and August, least amount of chance of raining. I think you're missing out, though. Rain's not all that bad, and it's not it's not that you would have days and days and days and days of it. The only time of year where the weather is sometimes foul for days on end is would be maybe in November, maybe. But July and August are usually pretty rain-free. Other than that, you're in a variable climate. You're in it's never going to get super cold. It's never going to get, by now it can get quite hot. So you always bring layers. Don't bring too much clothing, but bring good layers of clothing. That's really important. Because on some days you really just want to have a short sleeved shirt, and on other days you might need one of these. And that's within a week. It can easily be within a week. I have relatives still in the Netherlands, so the stretch from Amsterdam to Basel, I fly that every once in a while, and it's an hour's flight, and I literally will get on the plane. And I come out on the other end after an hour and go like, oh, not quite dressed for this. So I always have something in my suitcase that I can put on, or I have always something that I can take off if I have to the moment I land. Be prepared. Boy Scout motto.
Thank you very much, Joost. Our next question for you comes from Sandra, who's in the US, and she asks, on board the ship, are dining tables assigned, or is it random seating?
It's open seating. Doesn't that sound a lot friendlier than random seating? No, it's open seating. You don't reserve seats. We would like you to sit with whoever you want, and we also encourage people that, for instance, are traveling by themselves, to meet other people. It's an enormous part of the whole experience that you get to know other people.
Thank you very much, Joost. Our next question for you comes from Annette, who's in Basel in Switzerland, and she asks, is there an opportunity to eat seafood on board during the Rhine Getaway cruise?
If this is Annette in Basel, then I think I know who's asking Annette. Yes, but there isn't a lot of local seafood other than in the Netherlands. When we have a taste of the Netherlands, that comes with fish. But other than that, you're on a river that doesn't yield a lot of fish, and you go further inland, which isn't to say that you can't have fish, but it's not very local. We always serve salmon. The dill salmon is one of our chairman's favorite dishes, and you'll have it on the ship as much as you like, essentially. So there's seafood. It's just not very local, except in Holland.
Thank you very much. Yes. Our next question for you comes from Kathy, who's in the US, and she asks, if one has dietary restrictions such as no or low fat, low cholesterol, no sodium, do we have options available on board Viking?
Yes, we ask that when you book, you let us know. This is information that goes directly to the chef. You then, when you get on board, you make sure that the chef actually knows what your dietary restrictions are. And even if for whatever reason your announcement didn't make it to the chef, which rarely happens, but let's just assume worst case scenario, and he doesn't quite know that you're coming and what your dietary restrictions are, you can talk to him about that on your first day of it, on the first night, and we will cater to you. It's entirely unproblematic.
Thank you very much. Our next question comes from John, who is in East Lake in the US. And he says, there must be a dining option off the ship in the evening in Cologne. He says he's looking on the website and can only see beer excursions for Cologne. But do we offer any excursions for culinary experiences?
The beer excursion comes with a little bit of food. And if you unless you're looking for a huge meal, that little bit of food will do the trick. You'll have enough food. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Joost. Our next question for you comes from Denise, who is in the US, and she says she would like to come on this cruise to see the beautiful fall colours in Bâle, but which month would you recommend to visit to see that? September, October, or November?
No, it's a little later here than it is in for instance in New England. It's October. Yeah.
Perfect. And our next question for you comes from Kingford, who is in Dallas in the US, and they ask, on Rhine cruises, is there a best port of call to eat braised pork knuckle?
No, because it's a dish that's quite widespread. I would do that in Cologne. There's actually a place called the Haxe House in Cologne. That's their specialty. It's an ancient restaurant. It's rustic, I would say, no white tablecloths, but they serve that Haxe House. H-A-X-E, and then house, H-A-U-S. That's for your pork knuckles.
Thank you very much, Joost. We've got a question here that did make me chuckle a little bit from Karen, who is in Bismarck in the United States. I'll read it out to you exactly how it's written. Question is quite simple. It's, will I gain weight on this cruise?
No, none. Actually, you'll come home and you'll look better than you ever did.
And our next question for you, Joost, comes from Alan, who is in the US. And he says, we're traveling to Omerammergau on the 8th of July from Amsterdam. How much of this program will I see and taste on that itinerary?
It depends. I mean, if what you have is Amsterdam, Basel, and then Omerammergau, it's the whole thing. You travel the length of the Rhine, so it's everything that I just described. Yep.
And our next question for you comes from Carol, who is in the United States. And she says, I don't drink beer, but I do enjoy a hard cider. Is there any available on this cruise?
Nothing really. I mean, yeah, it just so happens, for instance, that there's a place not far from where I live that produces cider, but it's not Germany and Switzerland, Netherlands. It's not known for cider. That's that. You know, you need to go to France for that, really. But you can get them. It's not like they don't exist, but they come from elsewhere.
Thank you very much, Joost. Our next question for you comes from Sandy, who is in Naperville in the US. And she asks, are the wines that are available on the Silver Spirits package on board available to drink without purchasing the Silver Spirits drinks package?
Yes, yes. Then it's just a matter of paying by the bottle.
Thank you very much, Joost. And our next question for you comes from Rich, who is in the United States. He asks, if we purchase a bottle of wine off ship, are we free to enjoy it at dinner on board?
You're encouraged to enjoy it. Yes, you're free and encouraged.
Absolutely. And our next question comes from, let's have a quick look. Laura, who is in Arizona in the US, and they ask, what is the Dutch stroopwafel, and can we try it on this Rhine sailing?
Yes, you missed the first part of it because we talked about it, but it's a stroopwafel is basically, you pronounce it O, double O is O. A stroopwafel is, yeah, you can get them anywhere in the Netherlands by now. And it's made a career. When I was in high school, it was really something very much local in Gouda, but it's made a career, and you now can get them anywhere in the Netherlands, and in different flavors. I'm a purist. I'm a traditionalist. I like mine with just caramel, no honey, no chocolate covered, but you can have them in many different ways, shapes, or forms.
Thank you very much, Joost. And I've got a comment here for you, not a question, from Mika from Montclair in the US. And she says, hi, Joost. Stroopwafels are so good, but it does depend who is making them. And she says fresh ones are so hard to find, but not to worry, Viking River Cruises have plenty of mini waffles. And she says she ate many when she was on board with us last time. But our next question for you comes from Shah, who is in Strongsville in the US. He says that he has a severe seafood allergy and is asking how safe he will be without any cross-contaminants.
We have one galley, and so it really depends. You would have to probably do a little bit more research. It's one galley where all the food is prepared. Obviously, we don't set out. You know, we keep our fish and our meat separate. That is standard. I've known a friend of mine basically cannot sit next to someone that eats fish. That if it is that dire, then that's unavoidable, because someone in the next table over may order fish. So I don't know how bad your allergy is. If it is that severe, my friend literally cannot be in the same restaurant with someone that eats fish. So she's limited in what she can do. The cross contamination is not a big problem, but you will sit around people that have fish.
Thank you very much, Joost. Our next question comes from Annette, who is in the US. And she says, we're going on this cruise from Amsterdam to Bâle, departing on the August 26th. And she's asking, are we going to notice a temperature difference as we sail from the Alps to the North Sea?
It's incredibly hard to tell. Not a lot. Not a lot. You move a little bit from a land climate into a sea climate, but there's not going to be a lot of difference. No.
Perfect. And our next question for you comes from William. He says he loves wine, and do we offer any wine tasting opportunities on the Rhine Getaway?
Yes, so both in the Rheingau and in Alsace, we have wine tasting opportunities. So yes, and then you can do your own. I mean, you can just walk into towns and ask. You know, a lot of these towns that we take you to are small. They have their butcher, they have a wine store, and you can ask for local wines. So even in the places where we don't organize wine tastings, you can get local things. No wine in the Netherlands, though. There are like 2 or 3 vineyards, and none of them produce anything worthwhile.
Thank you very much, Joost. Our next question for you comes from Tim, who is in Dallas. He says, we are booked for a Rhine Christmas market cruise. Will we in general be able to go ashore during most evenings to visit the Christmas markets on our own at night? And then he also goes on to ask, what are your favourite Christmas markets?
Cologne, because Cologne has 4 of them. And they really know how to do Christmas markets. So the answer is yes. In most evenings you'll be able, but not all Christmas markets go on into the evening. There are quite a few of them that close at 8 o'clock at night. Cologne is good. Basel is nice. Basel is also quite nice. And Strasbourg. But Cologne is my favorite.
Thank you very much, Joost. And our next question is from Joanne, who is also booked on a Christmas markets cruise. Her question is, should we expect snow in December, or most likely would it be raining in December?
There's a reasonable chance that you'll have a little bit of rain, not a lot. Snow is unlikely. Used to be, not so much anymore.
I agree. And our next question is our last question for this evening, as it is all the time we have, I'm afraid. And it comes from Scott. Great name there, I must say. And he's in North Carolina in the US and asks, how rigorous are the walking tours on this itinerary?
You can basically walk as rigorous as you want. We try to have a little bit of differentiation. We know that while some people still like to walk, they just need to take it a little slower. And then you have people that want to walk and want to really get some exercise in. So we split up groups. We generally have a group for people that like to have a leisurely pace and a group that has a more normal pace, or a somewhat faster pace. So you can pace yourself. It's relatively easy to do. And you got to keep in mind that you have choices of excursions every day. So you could even say, okay, I will start off fast. At some stage, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to do it a little slower. I'm not going to go quite as far. So you have options of, really calibrating it to where you're comfortable. And the guides know this. We're not going to try to, tire you out.
Thank you very much, Joost. And that's all the time we have for questions this evening.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for enduring my cough. I apologize. It's pollen, I think. The doctor gave me something for it, but it hasn't quite kicked in yet. We'll see you some other time at Wanderlust Wednesdays. Have a great one.